Welcome to the very first installment of our Hutch and TargetGov webinar series. So this is our first of three coming up this month. My name is Stephanie Chin, she, her pronouns. I'm the director of Hutch at Fearless, and I'm excited today to be your moderator for today's webinar. So what is Hutch? Some of y'all might be familiar with us, but we are an intensive 24-month incubator program that gives entrepreneurs the blueprint needed in order to be able to scale, specifically within digital services and the government contracting landscape. So we provide tools, mentorship, peer support, all of that to help our companies be able to succeed without getting lost amongst some of the bigger competitors in the space. Today we have one of our longstanding Hutch partners, TargetGov, who supports a lot of our cohort companies within Hutch, and super excited today to be able to have Kiyon joining us as our subject matter expert and our speaker for today's introduction to federal government contracting.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that wonderful introduction. And yes, TargetGov and Hutch and Fearless have been partners for quite some time now. We've helped and had several Fearless and Hutch participants become TargetGov clients, and I know that we've sent some TargetGov clients over to Fearless and to Hutch for some partnership opportunities and for some growth and learning. And so it's been a very effective partnership for both of us, and we're really excited to be a part of both this series and a part of the Hutch program as you guys look to help companies specifically, and especially IT companies, grow their footprint in the federal marketplace and help them grow their companies. Today, we've got some really exciting information to get through for you all. We're going to be focusing on intro to government contracting. Recording stop. Do we want to? There we go. All right. I know we've got a little bit of a variety in terms of who we have on the line, and so I will do my best to make sure that I am defining all of the acronyms that I use. I'll get into that in just a couple of slides for those folks who might be a little bit newer to the marketplace. And I'll be talking a little bit about some changes and updates for things that some of you more experienced contractors who maybe you've done work in the federal marketplace already that you still need to know about, because things are changing and processes are being updated in the federal marketplace for how they do business. Here's our agenda up on the screen today. And then Stephanie, did you want me to take over the slides? Here, let me do that.
That's perfect.
So there's our agenda for the day up on the screen once I share it. So I'm not going to spend the time going through our agenda, but these are all of the things that we're going to cover. We're going to jump right into our first section. There I am again. My name is Kiyon Brandford. I'm a senior consultant with TargetGov. Been with TargetGov for a few years now. I've helped several dozens of clients both enter the marketplace and grow their revenues in the federal marketplace. Part of what TargetGov does is we help you, especially with your marketing and business development efforts in the federal marketplace, some of which we will talk about today. I'll be giving you some tips and tricks for you to include and for you to incorporate in your company's practices now. And we do that by implementing what are called our FAST process and our Kickstart program. Both are proprietary processes and services that we provide at TargetGov. There's contact information there if you all want to reach out. Please give us a call if you'd like to inquire. So our first slide here, before you decide to jump into the federal marketplace, you really have to know and understand what the federal government buys, what they don't buy, how they buy those things, and what kind of companies they're interested in. And so I wanted to do a breakdown in this first slide of one, to let you know that the federal government, our US federal government, is the world's Fortune 1 spender. And what that means is that our US federal government spends more dollars than any other entity in the entire world. They spend over $750 billion each year with companies just like you, small businesses, women-owned small businesses, service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses. And there was actually a report that I was just reading today that the federal government just eclipsed a new milestone in that they did over $770 billion worth of spending in the past fiscal year, in fiscal year 23. I put up some of the various categories that the federal government does spending in so that folks can get a feel and understanding for if you fit anyway, right? The federal government, they buy lots and lots of products and services. And I will tell you, in my experience in working with several federal contractors, I've worked with contractors across various industries. I've worked with construction contractors, I've worked with IT contractors, professional services contractors. There are opportunities for you to pursue in the federal marketplace, regardless of what industry you are participating in. What you really need to do is focus in on those particular agencies that are buying your specific products and services. We'll talk a little bit about how to figure that out today, but I wanted to let everyone know on the call today that there are opportunities for you for the most part. If you have a company and you provide products or services, the federal government is probably interested in what you all do. It's just up to you to do that research to figure out who exactly within the federal government is going to be interested in your specific products and services. In the same light, when you're deciding to enter the federal marketplace, one of the things that you're really going to have to do is to embrace the differences of doing business in the federal marketplace versus doing business in the commercial space or in the consumer space. There are some stark differences that really change the processes and change the way that you do business when you decide to do business with the federal government. I'm going to go through a few of them on this slide here. Language. This is typically the first thing that I discuss with people when they're deciding to jump into the federal marketplace. I call it an acronym salad. There are entire sentences that you can put together that actually make sense in federal contracting that are made entirely of acronyms. HHS, OSDBU, SBLO. I just said a bunch of letters, and all of those letters mean things. But if you aren't familiar with those acronyms and familiar with those letters, then you're going to look a little bit like a deer in headlights. Now, that can be a drawback for two major reasons. One, if you're trying to jump into a marketplace, you're going to want to know exactly what someone's saying when they're speaking those acronyms to you, right? You want to be able to take that information in, to analyze it, synthesize it, and then go out and do your own research and your own preparation on those things that they discuss with you. In addition to that, and this has to do a little bit more with the marketing, of which we'll talk about a little bit more today, is that if you're building a relationship with a decision maker and they're speaking acronyms to you, that acronym salad to you, and you look like a deer in headlights, they're going to get a sense that you probably are pretty green in the federal marketplace. And if there's one thing about federal contracting, federal contractors want to know that you're prepared and they want to know what your experience is. If you aren't familiar with the language, if you aren't familiar with the acronyms, they're going to get a sense that you aren't familiar with the processes and with federal contracting. And that can turn them off and push them away, especially particularly for small businesses who are just entering the marketplace. And so spend some time with the language, with those acronyms. If you see an acronym as you're doing your research on federal contracting, don't skip over it. Go to Google. That's usually where I do most of my acronym research. Go to Google, look up what that acronym is, and figure out exactly what that decision maker or exactly what they're trying to say to you. Next thing, rules and regulations. In the federal marketplace, they are driven and structured by the Federal Acquisition Regulations, the FAR, one of our acronyms. If I say an acronym today and I don't define what the acronym is, Stephanie, please stop me and tell me to define what that acronym is. So the Federal Acquisition Regulations, the FAR, there are other acquisition regulations that the federal government has to follow as well, but the FAR is the overarching federal acquisition regulations that need to be followed. And the purchases done in the federal marketplace, for the most part, fall within those federal acquisition regulations. And similar to that point of being able to speak the language with the decision makers who are looking to buy your products and services, same thing with the rules and regulations. If you aren't familiar with the rules and regulations, that's going to push decision makers away, particularly contracting officers. So just a couple points I'm going to talk about decision makers, but contracting officers in particular, they have the legal responsibility to spend the federal government's dollars or to spend our tax dollars on behalf of the federal government. And if they misappropriate those funds or rules are broken as they are awarding those funds to a federal contractor, they can get in big trouble. I don't know about you all, but I don't look good in orange. And I think contracting officers don't necessarily like to wear orange. And so if you get my drift, They want to know that you are familiar with the rules and regulations, and that if they do that procurement with your company, that everything is going to be on the up and up. You understand how the process works. You're going to follow the rules and regulations, and you're going to perform the contract to the best of your ability. So spend some time with the FAR, with the Federal Acquisition Regulations, and always, 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 if you don't understand a FAR clause, if you have some legal question, please, please, please reach out to legal counsel. Those are the people who understand those things, and you don't want to leave any gray area when it comes to understanding and following those federal acquisition regulations. So always, always rope in legal counsel when necessary. There are some required registrations when it comes to doing business in the federal marketplace. I'm going to talk about those in just a couple of slides. There is something called contract vehicles. Now, this can be quite a contentious and a bit of a confusing concept in the federal marketplace. And so let me just go over it quickly. A contract vehicle in federal contracting is what the government uses to pay the contractor for their products or services. And it is deliberately that broad. There are thousands and thousands of contract vehicles across the federal marketplace. Whatever that vehicle, whatever that contract that they are using to buy your products and services, that is the contract vehicle being used. Now, different agencies have access to different contract vehicles. There are contract vehicles that can be used government-wide, which are particularly handy for decision makers, but you, as a contractor going into the federal marketplace, need to be familiar with the concept of contract vehicles. And when you start narrowing down who your targets are going to be, you need to be familiar with the contract vehicles that your particular targets use. Past performance, past performance, past performance. Past performance is a critical element to doing business in the federal marketplace. The federal government doesn't want to be your trial run. I'll put it that way. They don't want to be your first customer. They want to know that someone has paid you for your services in the past and that you perform those services for them. And they want to know a little bit about the results you delivered to that client. And so as you're performing on your commercial contracts, right, make sure you're keeping track of those things. Make sure you're keeping track of the details of those contracts and that you can use those past performance examples in your presentations to federal decision makers to give them a feel and understanding of who you've performed for and how well you've performed for them. In just a couple slides, we're going to look at an acquisition life cycle of a federal opportunity. It can be huge. It can be several years before the federal government decides to buy something from the inception of the idea. Keep that in mind, right? As you're doing business, you're going to have to keep in mind your revenue stream, right? If opportunities are taking several months to be awarded, you have to know how long it's going to be before a new opportunity is going to come to your doorstep, right? And so understanding that acquisition or that business development life cycle is extremely important for preparing yourself to move into this federal marketplace. There are several decision makers in the federal purchasing process. The layers that we break them into are three. The first layer we call your door openers. Those are your OSDBUs. That is your offices of small and disadvantaged business utilization. They say it that way. It's a really funny acronym. I like saying it, and so I'm going to keep saying it. OSDBU. So you have your OSDBU offices, right? They help you break into their respective agencies. Each federal agency has an OSDBU office or a small business office that will help you as the small business break into that federal agency and get to know the decision makers and know what opportunities are coming out. And so one of your first steps for jumping into a federal agency and pursuing federal opportunities is to reach out to that OSDBU to get a capability briefing with them, to get a one-on-one meeting with them. The other two layers of decision makers, I've already talked about one a little bit, the contracting officers, right? Those are the folks who sign their names at the end of the contract. They're the ones who actually have the authority to award those dollars to a contractor. They're the ones who review the RFPs, review the proposals. They put out the sources sought notices on Sam.gov and other places as well. And then the last layer, the third layer of decision makers, we call those your program managers and end users. These are the folks who actually use your products and services. These are the ones who are within the agencies who are carrying out those missions, carrying out those projects that require your products and services for them to execute properly. Most times, and just so we'll tie this back to the federal procurement timeline. Most times, a procurement starts with the program person, right? The program person identifies an issue at the agency. So we're having problems with our software systems. We need someone to come in and do a software maintenance for us. And so that program person goes to a contracting officer and lets them know, we have a software issue. We need you to go find us a contractor who can do some software maintenance for us. It's then that contracting officer's job to go find a contractor who can provide those services. This is how all of those pieces, those decision makers go like this, and they all tie together. So they're all working on this same opportunity together, which means they're all going to be important to your efforts in pursuing that opportunity. Okay. Relationships, relationships, relationships. I just talked about layers of decision makers. There are going to be several people for each opportunity you want to pursue. Building relationships with those people is the key to success in the federal marketplace. What do I mean? What do I mean by building relationships? I mean marketing to them regularly, right? At least once a month, all of your decision makers should receive some piece of news from your company, something that happened, a newsletter, an article, something that happened. That way you stay top of mind, you stay in their inbox. That another thing that plays into building those relationships, going to government events, right? Federal agencies host all kinds of government industry events for you to go to, attend, and build relationships with those decision makers. If your target agency is going to be at an event, you need to do whatever you can to make sure that you also go to that event. Go shake hands with the people, go kiss the babies, if you will, and go build relationships with those people. And then the last thing, marketing. I just mentioned a little bit of it. Marketing to your targets regularly. Social media is important for federal contracting, especially LinkedIn. And so if you aren't on LinkedIn, both you, the company, right? The company needs to have a LinkedIn page. In addition to all of the decision makers at the company also need to have LinkedIn pages. That is a place where federal decision makers do research and where they look for companies who can provide the products and services that they are looking for. So I don't go over all of those differences to scare anybody, but if you're going to decide to jump into the marketplace, you need to know what you're up against. You need to know what research you need to do so that when you get into these rooms, you get into these conferences with these decision makers, you're speaking from an educated place. Again, you don't want to seem green. Is that me? Okay. So these next couple of slides are just visual representations that I wanted to provide you all so that you get a feel and understanding for exactly how big the federal government is. And then on the next slide, how long that federal procurement process can be. So this is a diagram of our federal government. You see the Constitution up there at the top. And typically when we're talking about federal procurement, we're talking about those agencies that are in that come down from that middle column and then they spread out. Those are agencies that are within the executive branch of our federal government. They are the agencies or the offices that are overseen by the office of the president, right? The executive branch. So each one of those agencies is responsible for their own spending. And so one of the things that I tell my clients all the time is that the federal government is not your customer, right? When you're thinking about who your customer is in the federal marketplace, the federal government at large, you can't, especially as a small business, you can't go after everybody. You tried to go after every single one of the agencies on this slide, you would probably be working 28 hours a day. And so you have to pick and choose and be targeted about which agencies you want to pursue. And each one of them have their own preferences and practices for how they buy things. You want to become intimately aware and familiar with exactly how your specific agency, not the federal government at large, but how your specific agency is interested in buying your products or interested in buying your services. A little bit earlier, I mentioned how long the federal opportunity life cycle can be, the federal opportunity timeline can be. And this is actually a graphic that was developed by the National Security Agency. This was not developed by us at TargetGov, and this was used at their reverse industry day to essentially talk about how they can improve in the various phases of their procurement process. If you look in the middle, there's like a black dotted line there. Most companies, when they decide to jump into the federal marketplace, they start their marketing and they start their business development efforts to the right of that dotted line. And you can see there that first phase to the right of the dotted line is the release of the RFP. If you wait until the RFP comes out on Sam.gov or wherever the RFP comes out, and you haven't done any of the things to the left of that dotted line, you are at a severe disadvantage. There are dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds, depending on how big the opportunity is, of companies who have done that front end work to the left of that dotted line, where they've marketed to the decision makers regularly. They've gone to the events where those decision makers were. They've reached out to those decision makers for one-on-one meetings, and they've helped write the requirements, refine the requirements, and develop the acquisition strategy for that opportunity. They've had their hands directly in the making of the pie. And so if you jump in and you just try to eat the pie because it's in the oven, it's a little bit too late, right? You need to do all of the prep work on the front end. That marketing, that business development, that capture work is one of the ways that you'll hear folks talk about it. Sometimes they'll talk about it as capture. You need to do all of that work on the front end to put yourself in the best position for when you hit that dotted line and the RFP comes out. All right, Stephanie, while we've got a second here, we can take a pause. Do we have any questions from the audience? If not, that's all right. I'll keep going.
Yeah, reminder for everybody, feel free to go ahead and drop questions throughout Kiyon's presentation over into the chat, and we'll answer our questions as we go, and we'll also have some dedicated time at the end for any burning questions that you might have.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, required registrations. If you want to do business in the federal marketplace, it is mandatory that your company is registered in the System for Award Management. That is SAM. Excuse me. That is SAM. Sam.gov. So before there was Sam.gov, if you look at that graphic at the bottom of the slide there are you see various databases that are all being consolidated into SAM. And that used to be how you do the research for federal contracting you'd have to go to all of these various databases. You'd have a bunch of tabs open, you'd have a bunch of bookmarks for all of them, and you'd have to go to each website and you'd have to pick the right website to find the right piece of information that you were looking for. The federal government decided that was a little bit convoluted and a little bit challenging, especially for folks who are just entering the marketplace. And so a few years ago, what they decided to do was come out with this new system called the System for Award Management, where they would consolidate all of these databases into one database, the System for Award Management, so that you could access all of that information and do all of that research in just one place. So like I mentioned, it's required. You have to register in SAM in order to do business with the federal government. It's one of those few requirements that you have to have. It is how you will get paid. You will get paid through Sam.gov. There are a number of different ways for you to get paid by the federal government. It can happen through credit card. It can happen through electronic funds transfer. But that payment and that account information lives in Sam.gov. And so again, if you're not registered in Sam.gov, you can't do business and you can't get paid. And the point of doing business is to get paid. And so you have to make sure you're registered in SAM. One of the other things that SAM is now being used for what the federal government calls market research. So on that last slide, we looked at that timeline, right? Everything to the left of that dotted line that was on that slide, that is what the federal government deems market research. During that time, what the federal government is doing is they are looking into the marketplace, looking at industry to figure out exactly which companies, what kind of companies can provide them with the products and services that they are looking for, right? Are there women-owned small businesses who can do this work? Are there service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses who can do this work? Are there no small businesses who can do this work? And so we have to award this and put this out as full and open competition for large business, right? So they're getting a feel and understanding for what kinds of companies out there can provide those products and services. And at the same time, they're also doing what's called requirement refinement. And so they are refining exactly what those requirements are going to be for that opportunity as companies respond to their sources sought notices and respond to their RFIs. Now, next week, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence in federal government, specifically in federal contracting. And I will tell you that Sam.gov and this next registration that we're going to cover in the next slide, they are the key to tapping into how the federal government's using artificial intelligence to find contractors just like you to do business with. Okay. And so in Sam.gov, there is a place for you to put keywords and phrases, and keywords and phrases are that magic element that helps you get found by decision makers. There's a place for you to put keywords and phrases into your Sam.gov profile. And so if you're a cybersecurity company, for example, and let's say you don't have cybersecurity in your company name, but the federal government, they buy cybersecurity services all the time. You want your company to show up when the federal government does a search on cybersecurity. There is a way for you to put those kinds of keywords in Sam.gov so that when they do those searches, your company shows up. So come back next week, a little bit of a teaser for next week. Come back next week for that session on artificial intelligence in federal government contracting, and I will tell you exactly where to put those keywords and phrases. It's for all the small businesses on the line. You also have another registration that you can take advantage of that I strongly recommend you take advantage of. It is called the SBA's Dynamic Small Business Search. This is one of the databases, one of the portals that federal decision makers must search to look for small businesses to provide the products and services that they are interested in procuring. Okay, so one of the mandates in those federal acquisition regulations that I was talking about earlier is that for procurements, right, federal decision makers, they have to go look for small businesses. They can't just skip small businesses and say, I already know there's no small businesses out there who can do this, and so we're going to award it to Northrop Grumman because they're the only ones who can do it. Federal government can't do that. They first have to go and look and see whether or not there are small businesses out there who can provide them with the products and services that they are looking for. This dynamic small business search portal is written into the FAR, right? It's written into several SBA rules for being one of the places that can be searched to look for small businesses who can provide the services or provide the products that the federal government's looking for. Okay. There are also opportunities for you to put keywords and phrases in the dynamic small business search as well. At the bottom of the slide there, you see there are 4 places to put keywords and phrases in the dynamic small business search profile, non-federal government certifications. If you have things like PMP or CMMC, CMMI, I would say to include those. Those are pertinent and relevant to federal decision makers. If you don't, then just use those fields for regular keywords and phrases. Your capabilities narrative, I know it says to write a narrative. I do not recommend you write a narrative. Instead, I recommend you use keyword, comma, space, keyword, comma, space. Use as much of that field for unique keywords and phrases as you possibly can. If you have more keywords and phrases, and you should, put those in special equipment and materials. And then last but not least, there's actually a keywords field in the dynamic small business search. And so you can imagine with that field as well, you want to put keywords and phrases. There's one other thing that I really, really want to hit on to make sure that everyone who's on the line right now, if you are a small business and you're in the dynamic small business search, you have to go fill this out. In the dynamic small business search, there is a place for you to put your company's past performance, or I think they call it past experience. If I was a federal decision maker and I went to your dynamic small business search profile and I saw that you had no past performance in your dynamic small business search profile, the only assumption that can be made is that you have never done business before. Now, I know that is not the case, and that's not true for most of you. And so you don't want to leave a decision maker with the impression that you are a startup rookie business who has never done business before and that the federal government would be your first customer. Make sure that you fill out that past performance so that you look like the company that you are. A lot of this is just making sure that your registrations, your marketing materials, your image, right, your branding portrays the company that you actually are. Many of you already have successful operations and successful businesses in the commercial space, right? Make sure that when federal decision makers come looking for you in federal databases, you look like the successful contractor that you are. And so make sure you fill all of those things out, in particular your performance history examples. Okay. In those profiles as well, you will have to put something called NAICS codes. NAICS stands for North American Industry Classification System. The first words that I want you to focus on there are the first two, actually. North American. This coded system was created by North America, right? This was not created by just our US federal government. And it was used so that when we go to these big conferences with Canada and Mexico, we can say across the continent, we spent $14 billion in textile services over the past year. It's just a metric, a way for them to group industries, to group the services that they buy, so that when we look at those numbers in aggregate, we have a similar coding system that we all use. Okay. Our federal government have adopted that system to describe the products and services that they also buy. Now I want you to focus on the third word, industry classification, or the third and fourth word, industry classification. NAICS codes don't describe products and services. They describe industries. Now, those are not necessarily completely foreign to each other, but they're not necessarily the same thing either. And so keep that in mind as you're looking at the various NAICS codes and you're doing research on NAICS codes, that you may fit into one NAICS code, right? Or you think that that's the perfect NAICS code for you, but there may be other codes that other decision makers might be coding your work into. And so keep an open mind as to not just this is the code that describes us perfectly, but do we fit a piece of that particular code, right? Or this other code? Is there something in that code, a particular kind of service, a specific product that they're looking for that would fall into those categories? If so, I would still consider it for your potential NAICS codes. Okay. You can go search for NAICS at census.gov/NAICS. That's where you can go to look up NAICS codes. I would use keywords and phrases to get you started in terms of looking for specific codes and looking for specific services. But keep that in mind as you are scanning through NAICS codes. I wouldn't have any more than 10 to 12 if you are anyone except for construction. If you're construction, 15. That's about how many NAICS codes you want to have. You don't want to look like you do everything under the sun, right? If you do everything under the sun, then how do I know that you can do my one very specific thing? I heard someone say one time, there are niches, there are riches in niches. Thought that was funny. That's not mine. I'm not taking credit for that, but there's a point to that. There are riches in niches. Think about the things that you do best. That's typically the way that I frame it to my clients. I'll ask them, what do you do best, or what have you done the most of? Where is the bulk of your past performance? There's a reason why people keep coming back and purchasing those specific things from you, because you're really, really good at it. Focus in and hone in on those things that you're really, really good at and use those to propel you into the federal marketplace. Before we leave this slide, I want to let you know about one more coding system that I find particularly helpful, especially when I'm looking for federal opportunities. It is called the product or service codes. PSC is the acronym for those. So while NAICS codes were created by North America, the PSC codes, the product or service codes, those are created by the Department of Defense, our US Department of Defense. Those codes are way better at describing specific products and specific services. And so while the NAICS code might be administrative and general management consulting, right? The PSC code might be financial support. Now, that's a lot more specific, and that gets me a lot closer if I'm looking for financial services, or I'm looking to provide financial services. Financial services gets me a lot closer to the opportunities that I'm looking for versus administrative and general management consulting, right? That's very broad, very general. And so go look up the PSC codes that also align with your NAICS codes as well, and you can include those in your SAM profile as well. Those are great codes to use, especially for looking for opportunities. So those codes are they're really important for understanding what industry you play in, right, in the federal marketplace. But just a step further than that, they also dictate and indicate how much spending the federal government's going to do with the various socioeconomic groups or the various socioeconomic categories. And so the federal government sets aside a certain number of dollars each year to spend with small businesses. Right now, that overall small business spending goal is at 23% for all small businesses across the entire federal government. That's the goal for spending. And I will say, in general, the federal government does a pretty good job of getting to that 23% goal. And if you're doing the math, I'm not really good at math, and so if we've got any math whizzes on the line, then you guys can do the math a little bit better than me. But if you do the math, 23% of $750 billion is a lot of money. That's a lot of money to be dedicated and to go to small businesses. And so, again, there are opportunities here for you to pursue work in the federal marketplace. Now, where NAICS codes get roped in and tied in here to these small business goals is that whether or not you are a small business or an opportunity is determined by what's called the size standard of the NAICS code. So there are hundreds and hundreds of different NAICS codes, right? Each of those NAICS codes has their own size standard. Size standards start at $2.25 million. So if your company is larger than $2.25 million, depending on the code, you could potentially be a large business. There's no mid-sized business in the federal marketplace. You're large or you're small, no in between. Okay, so you could be a $3 million business, and depending on the code, the NAICS code that's attached to the work that you're performing, you could be technically a large business in that code. So keep that in mind again as you're performing, as you're building out your business development strategy. Are we a large business or are we a small business, depending on which NAICS code is being used? It goes all the way up to $47 million. That's a huge gap. That's a huge range. And so let's go back to our $3-4 million company. You could be a small business and a large business at the same time. And so you might work this one job where the size standard is $2.5 million, right? And you're over that size standard. But you might work this other job that's $15 million. Well, you're under that size standard. For that opportunity, you'll be a small business. So which NAICS code is being used is going to determine what your business development strategy is going to look like, and is going to determine whether or not you can participate in that opportunity as a small business. For manufacturing, small business size standards are determined by the number of employees, not your revenue. And so keep that in mind. If you're in manufacturing, then your size standards developed by the number of employees that you have. The other goal, so the 23% goal is the overall large or the overall small business goal across the entire federal government. It's then broken down into the various socioeconomic types. Service disabled, veteran-owned businesses, right? That goal has just gone up. It happened like 3 weeks ago, which was really, really awesome to see. The service disabled, veteran-owned small business goal has gone up to 5% now. It's now on par with the women-owned small business goal, which is also 5%. The service disabled business, or excuse me, the small disadvantaged business acronym. See, acronym salad even got me. The small disadvantaged business or 8A spending goal is currently at 12%. By 2025, that goal is going to go up to 15%. Just that increase in and of itself is a few $100 billion. And so if you are a small disadvantaged business or you qualify for the 8A program, now's not a bad time to start thinking about getting your paperwork together and getting into the federal marketplace before we get to 2025, which is next year. Shock in awe, everybody. 2025 is next year. Before we get there and the goal actually goes up to 15%, that'll really increase the number of opportunities there for small disadvantaged businesses. And then last but not least, I call them the black sheep of the family sometimes because they get treated that way, not because they're not better than anybody else, not because they aren't as good as anyone else. But the federal government, they've had trouble. They've actually never reached their 3% hub zone goal. And so if you are a hub zone or you're in a hub zone, there's some opportunity there for you. Everyone's always, and when I say everyone, I mean companies like Fearless. I mean agencies, I mean other partners. Pretty much everyone's always looking for good hub zones who can provide high quality products and services, just because they're so challenging to find. And so if you're in a hub zone, there might be some real opportunity there for you to pursue that socioeconomic certification, and then using that to build some partnerships with companies and with agencies who need hub zones to reach their small business goals. Contrary to popular belief, you do not need any of these certifications to do business in the federal marketplace, okay? So you don't need to be hub zone, you don't need to be veteran owned, you don't need to be woman owned small business in order to do business. You can do business with just your small business status in and of itself. And there's no certification for that. You don't need to go to any website for that. You don't need to go register anything. All you need to do is make sure that your company's registered, that you're registered in SAM, and that you fall under that dollar threshold or that employee threshold for the NAICS code that's being used to determine or to describe your work. That is how you indicate whether or not you are a small business. If by chance you are one of these various socioeconomic types, there are some websites for you to go to make sure that you validate those registrations. The veteran certification actually just got moved last year. At the beginning of last year, it moved over from the VA over to the SBA. Now there's a new website, veterans.certify.sba.gov, for you to go to and register your veteran-owned small business if you are one, or service-disabled veteran-owned business if you are one. The women-owned small business registration also has been moved over to the SBA. There, if you go to wasb.certify.sba.gov, they actually just updated the website. There is where you would update your WASB certification. And then for 8A, certify.sba.gov is your place to go. Right, we've made it to the poll. So we've got 3 questions out today. Stephanie, are you going to run those?
Yes, our Zoom poll is broken. We have broken the Zoom, but we'll do it the old school way. We'll put it over in the chat. So we have
awesome.
3 different quick knowledge check questions. You have an opportunity to win a free TargetGov book. So over in the chat, the first question is, which government agency is responsible for overseeing small business set-aside programs in federal contracting? It is multiple choice. So first one to get it right will get their code for their free TargetGov book, but you also have 2 more opportunities to win. So, all right, let's see. Casey, and I think Casey Cruz has the advantage because there's like 18 Casey Cruzes. This is rigged, y'all.
Yeah, we'll have to figure that one out. Yeah, I think Casey might win a couple bucks.
I know, right? Casey must have known we were gonna do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Everybody typing it in? Casey loves it, right? Yeah, of course. So correct answer is C, the Small Business Administration. All right, so you still have 2 more opportunities to win. So second question is what small business certification program is designed to help eligible companies compete for federal contracts? Lots of A's. Give everybody an opportunity. All right. Correct answer is A, the 8A Business Development Program. Good job, y'all. And then last but not least, third question is, in the context of federal government contracting, what does SAM stand for?
Oh, I gave that one away, didn't I?
Because you're a really good teacher, so.
Oh, thank you. I gave away the answers to the test. I'll try to do that next time.
All right, lots of B's in the chat.
Ooh.
Correct answer is indeed B, System for Award Management. So I will be direct messaging all of our winners to get your contact information and instructions for how to go ahead and get your free TargetGov book, but I will hand it over back to Kiyon to go through capability statements.
Thank you, Stephanie. Actually, I wanted to take 1 second to jump back to the dynamic small business search, because I saw that Thomas, thank you so much for putting that into the chat for everyone about the dynamic small business search. So Thomas, if you haven't seen in the chat, that link that's on the dynamic small business search slide is to get to the actual search portal for the dynamic small business search. That is not the same place that you will go to update your dynamic small business search. That website is connect.sba.gov. It is relatively new. It's only a few months old. And so if you haven't been there yet, then it's okay. It's only a few months old, so don't panic. But you need to go there. You log in with your login ID. So just the same login that you use to log into Sam, you use your same login ID. Then you'll have to request access to your dynamic small business search profile, depending on who you are. If it's the same login ID for your Sam profile as you use for your connect.sba, then it'll give it to you automatically. If not, then you'll have to request access to your dynamic small business search profile. In order to do that, and I've been telling everyone this because it can be startling if you see it, they will ask you for your UEI, and then the next thing they're going to ask you for is the company's bank account number. And I know that can be pretty frightening to just put into a web portal for anybody. They are asking you that so that they can verify that the person who's requesting access to your dynamic small business search profile, they are at least senior enough, or they at least have permission enough to see the company's bank account number. And so they felt that was a pretty secure indicator that that person is okay to have access to the company's dynamic small business search profile. So keep that in mind when you go to request that access, is that yes, they may ask you, yes, Thomas, they may ask you for the company's bank account information when you are requesting that access. All right, we've got one last content slide here before we wrap up today, and it's about capability statements. In terms of marketing materials, federal decision makers take in very specific mediums or media when it comes to taking in marketing materials. Like I mentioned earlier, LinkedIn is an important place for them to find contractors. They use LinkedIn regularly. They will post opportunities on LinkedIn, and so keep that in mind as you are scouring through LinkedIn for federal contractors or federal decision makers, excuse me. Your website is a key marketing tool for you when it comes to marketing to federal decision makers. One of the things that I recommend all of my clients do is that on the home page somewhere, you need to make it clear that you are open to and interested in doing business with federal entities. You can do that in a number of different ways. You can put just federal government supplier on your webpage somewhere. You can put in a sentence somewhere on the webpage that you serve the federal government or you serve federal customers. Whatever the case is, you want to make it clear that you are interested in being a federal contractor. Your business cards, those are crucial for doing business in the federal marketplace. If you have electronic business cards, that is very cool and very neat, but the federal government cannot use electronic business cards. They need paper business cards. Cybersecurity rules, all kinds of tech and security issues and all of those things. That's why, if you want to know. But the physical business card is the tool that you want to have and you want to use with those federal decision makers. Make sure that all of the information that you want a decision maker to have and be available to them is also included on your business card. Okay, so that includes things like your SAM UEI, that's the unique entity identifier UEI that you will get when you register in SAM. Make sure that's on your business card. Your cage code, make sure that's on your business card. If you've got your top 3 NAICS codes, make sure those things are on your business card. That will help the decision maker remember you and place you in the hundreds of contractors that they're currently doing research on. Last thing, your capability statement. This is it is now an essential piece to doing business in the federal marketplace. You would have serious trouble and serious challenges trying to do business in the federal marketplace without a capability statement. I really don't think it's possible. Could you? Maybe, but could you do it effectively? No. Capability statements have 5 sections. They have your contact information, your personal contact information, no sales at emails, no info at emails. It needs to be your personal contact information on your capability statement. You need a core competency section. I would call these sections these very specific things because they mean things to decision makers. Core competencies, differentiators. company data, and past performance. Those are your 5 sections to your capability statement. Okay. Each one of your capability statements needs to relate specifically to a very specific agency or office or prime contractor with very specific opportunities. Okay. So don't want to create a, if you're creating a CAPE statement without any source material, you're not doing it right. You need to have the agency's mission statement in front of you. You need to have opportunities that you are interested in for that particular agency in front of you. You want to do research on the agency's mission and their strategic goals for the upcoming year. You need source material to put together your capability statements so that you are speaking directly to your audience, the federal customer, or your prime contractor. Okay. In that capability statement, you want to pose real solutions to the problems that they or the challenges that they are facing. You do that in your differentiators section. I'll give you a quick example. And I usually use this help desk example. If a federal agency needs, if they need help desk support to close 500 tickets a month, right? And that's what they asked for in their sources sought notice. In your differentiators, you want to say something like, our help desk support closes 1,000 help desk tickets a month. So you are speaking directly to the problem that they're having. They need to close over 100 tickets a month. And you're telling them that we have already provided a solution to that problem where we already close over 100 help desk tickets a month. We would just need to add yours and we can help you solve your issue as well. Solve a real problem that they are having. This is what will get them to read your capability statement. Folks always ask me, like, how do you get the decision makers to read it? Solve their problem. When folks have challenges and folks have issues, they want a solution. And if you can be that company, you can be that capability statement that can provide them with that solution, they will talk to you. They will talk to you. Always send your capability statement in PDF format. Call it a capability statement, and in the file name, call it company name capability statement _ agency, right? So that agency knows it's specific to them. They have your company name in the file name already, and they know that it's your capability statement. In just a couple slides, there's a QR code where I'm going to be providing everyone in here. I think Stephanie and her team are going to send out a link as well to a capability statement guide along with an acronyms and glossary list so that you all can get started on learning your acronym salad, because it took me about a year before I could really understand when someone was speaking acronym salad and be able to digest it and then be able to speak it back to them. It took me about a year of studying those acronyms. Like I said, looking up every acronym that I find, I look it up. I don't pass by it. I don't just go, oh, I know what that stands for. Make sure you know what that stands for before you move on. All right. So that was our session today. We covered all of those things. We did SAM, SBA. We talked about NAICS, certifications, size standards, all of those great things. Here's that slide with the QR code. If you scan that QR code, again, you will get those materials from us. And I think, again, Stephanie and her team are going to send out a link for that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kiyon. So we have a couple minutes left. If anybody has burning questions that you're like, I cannot leave this webinar without the answer to this, now is the time. Feel free to drop that over in the chat. Like Kiyon had mentioned, you will be receiving both the slide deck and those complimentary materials and the recording after today's session. And you can always reach out directly to either one of us with any questions that might pop up afterwards. But we do have 2 more webinars coming up this month. Same time, same place. So book your calendars, make sure to register. We drop the link over in the chat if you haven't already registered for the next 2 webinars. They will be great topics to cover. So like Kiyon mentioned, we're going to be talking about how government is using AI and how you as a government contractor can also use AI within your toolkit.
Yep, exactly. Awesome. Thanks, Casey's.
Thanks, everyone.